Genesis chapter 3. One garden, one tree, one serpent, and two accounts of what he said in it, that cannot both be true. In the account you were taught, the serpent lies, and the woman falls for it. In the account that came out of a sealed jar in the Egyptian desert in 1945, the serpent is called the Instructor, and every word he says checks out. Eden, Rewritten, and not by us. The Heretic Codex is open, and tonight we read both accounts side by side. Start with the version you already have. The serpent tells the woman three things. She will not die. Her eyes will be opened, and she will become like the gods, knowing good and evil. She eats. She does not die. Her eyes are opened, and the text says so in the very next verse. And 9 verses later, God says this out loud, in the King James wording most of the English-speaking world grew up with. Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. Every single thing the serpent said would happen, happened. And the being who confirms it is the same being who said the opposite would happen. Eden, rewritten by the book itself. So how did the one speaker in that garden who turned out to be factually correct end up as the name we use for the devil? There was a group of Christians in the 2nd century who asked that question out loud, in writing, and answered it in a way that got their books taken out of a monastery library and put in a jar in the ground. Tonight we read 3 of those books, and in them the serpent tells the truth, and the God of the garden is in the dock. You do not have to believe either party. The argument itself is the artifact. If you want more of the books that got left out of the Bible, make sure to subscribe to the Heretic Codex. Now, 4 verses, read straight. The detail that eventually turns this story inside out is not the serpent at all. It is a pronoun in the 1st chapter, and when it was written, it was just grammar. Genesis 1, verse 26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Us. Our. There are ordinary explanations for that plural, and Hebrew scholars have offered several of them for a very long time. But hold the shape of the sentence, because a 2nd century reader with a suspicious mind is going to read that as a committee. Verse 2 of chapter 2 gives them the second one. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, a body made first, out of mud, lying there. And then, something blown into its face to switch it on. Third, chapter 2, verse 17, is the warning. Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. They eat. They do not die that day. Genesis chapter 5, verse 5, gives Adam 930 years. And fourth, the one that does the real damage, chapter 3, verse 22, in full. Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. So the expulsion is not punishment for eating. It is a security measure taken to stop a second theft. And verse 24 posts a guard on the tree of life, cherubim, and a flaming sword which turned every way. Now put one more text beside those. Isaiah chapter 45, where God says, "I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me." 2 verses later, in the same speech, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." Hold on to that first sentence in particular. I am the Lord, and there is none else. It is going to come back tonight in the mouth of somebody else entirely, and the people who put it there had read Isaiah very carefully indeed. Hold that verse. A 2nd century reader is going to build an entire theology on it. Nothing in that list is a secret. Every verse is in every Bible in every hotel room in the world, in the order I read them. The 2nd century did not need a hidden document to get suspicious. They only needed to read slowly. What they wrote down when they did is what got buried. In December 1945, at the foot of a cliff called Jabal al-Tarif, near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for the soft, nitrate-rich soil people there used as fertilizer. His mattock hit something hollow. It was a clay jar sealed at the neck, tall enough to come up to his knee. He hesitated over it. The story he told later is that he was afraid a jar buried in a cliff might have a spirit shut inside it, and then decided it might just as easily have gold. So he broke it open. There was no gold. There were 13 books, bound in leather, written on papyrus in Coptic, which is the last stage of the ancient Egyptian language, written in mostly Greek letters. He carried them home and dumped them by the oven. And at some point in the weeks that followed, his mother tore up part of one and fed it into the fire to get the bread going. Hold that image, because it is the whole history of this material in one room. Everything anybody knows about what these people believed survives because a woman in Upper Egypt needed kindling and stopped short of the rest of the pile. Most of what she left is in the Coptic Museum in Cairo today, and it contains around 50 texts nobody in the modern world had ever read. 3 of them are about Eden. The first book, a god who cannot make a body stand up. The first one is called the Secret Book of John, and it is the most copied text in the whole collection. It turns up 3 separate times in that jar, in Codices 2, 3, and 4, and a 4th copy of it was already sitting in Berlin, which is a story we will come back to at the end of the episode. It opens somewhere else entirely, and the best way to take it is the way it was meant to be taken, as a story. So here's the story. Before the garden, before the earth, before there was anywhere for anything to happen, there is a source. It has no name and no edge, and nothing has ever been outside it. In time, if time is even the word, it becomes aware of itself, and that awareness is a second being. And from the 2 of them, a whole ordered household of beings comes out like light off water. They live together in a fullness where nothing is missing. The last of them, and the youngest, is called Sophia. Her name means wisdom. Sophia wants to make something of her own. She does it without her partner and without asking, and the thing she brings out is wrong. It has the body of a serpent and the face of a lion, and its eyes throw off light like lightning going off behind cloud. She looks at what she has made, and she is ashamed of it. So she wraps it in a cloud, and she carries it away from the others, and she leaves it out there in the dark by itself. It grows up alone. It has never seen anything above itself, because there has never been anything above it to see. And a thing that has never seen anything above itself will eventually come to a conclusion about what it is. Its name is Yaldabaoth. The text puts the sentence in its mouth like this: I am God, and there is no other God beside me. That is Isaiah, almost word for word, and every reader in the ancient Mediterranean who knew the scriptures would have heard it land. The most famous statement of monotheism in the Hebrew Bible, given to a lion-headed thing in a cloud who says it because he genuinely does not know any better. And then a voice answers him from above. It says he is mistaken, and it calls him by another name, Samael. The text glosses that name for you, and the gloss is the whole reading in 2 words: the blind God. He makes rulers under himself, and the secret book of John gives them faces, because these are the powers that will be doing the work. A sheep's face, a donkey's face, a hyena's face, a serpent with 7 heads, a dragon, an ape, and one whose face is shining fire. Then the image of a perfect human appears reflected in the waters below them, and the rulers see it, and they say the line from Genesis 1 back at itself: Let us make a man according to the image and according to the likeness. So they build one, not by breathing on dust, by manufacture part by part, each power making its assigned component. and the long version of the text runs through the components in a catalog that goes on for pages, angel by angel, joint by joint, and then names its own source for the list, a book it calls the Book of Zoroaster. And when they have finished it, they cannot make it stand. That is the beat this episode exists for. The body is complete, anatomically perfect, assembled by more than 300 powers working to a plan, and it lies there on the ground and does not move, and none of them can do anything about it. The text says it stayed like that for a long time. More than 300 powers on the build, and not one of them had the job of making it stand. The fix comes as a trick. Beings from above come down disguised as Yaldabaoth's own advisors and give him a suggestion. Blow the spirit that is in you into the face of the thing. Breathe on it. He does it. Genesis 2, verse 7, happening for a completely different reason. And the moment he does it, the power he had stolen from his mother goes out of him and into the body, and the body sits up. Adam moves and thinks, and turns out to be brighter than the entire committee that made him. And the rulers look at what they have just switched on and are terrified of it. So they take it and throw it down into the lowest region of matter. The creation of humanity, in this telling, is a workplace accident. That is the story as the secret book of John tells it. And stepping back out of it for a moment, notice what it is actually doing. It is an answer to a question every religion has to face. If God is good, where does all this come from? The Gnostic answer is the most radical one available. Who told you he was good? Everything else in the book follows from that single move, which leaves one question the whole tradition turns on. Who told them about the tree? Then, the tree. Which brings us to the trees, and to the honesty this channel runs on, because here the famous book does something most people repeating this story have never actually checked. In the secret book of John, the tree the rulers plant as their tree of life is poison. The text says, its root is bitter, its branches are death, its shadow is hatred, and its fruit is desire. It looks like life, and it is the opposite. The other tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is described as light, and as insight, and as something the rulers do not want touched. Somebody comes and gets Adam and Eve to eat from it deliberately, in order to wake them up. And the text tells you who that somebody was. John, who is the one asking the questions all the way through, puts it straight to the teacher. Was it not the serpent that taught her? And the answer is no. The teacher in the tree, in this book, appeared in the form of an eagle, to teach them and to wake them out of the depth of sleep. The serpent gets credited with something else in this text, with desire and defilement, and it is a separate job from the one done up in the branches. So the most famous Gnostic book about Eden, the one with 4 surviving copies, is not the one that makes the serpent the hero. Anyone who tells you otherwise has read a summary of it rather than the book. Which matters, and not only because we would rather be correct than exciting. It matters because these people were never one church with one doctrine. They were arguing with each other, and the proof of that is sitting in the same jar, about 40 pages away. Which leaves the obvious objection, and it is worth putting the way you would put it. If the most copied Gnostic book in the collection does not make the serpent the hero, where did that idea come from? Not from a summary, and not from the internet. From another book in the same jar, about 40 pages away. The second book, the Instructor. The second text is called the Hypostasis of the Archons, which means the reality or the nature of the rulers. It is in Codex 2, a few tractates after the secret book of John, and it retells the same stretch of Genesis with the same cast and one enormous difference. Watch how much of the first book it repeats, because the repetition is the evidence. It gives you the boast again first, so you know you are in the same world. The chief ruler says, "It is I who am God. There is none apart from me." And a voice out of the light above him answers, "You are mistaken, Samael." And again the name is glossed for the reader as the God of the blind. Same claim, same correction. Second book, independent copy. Then the rulers make Adam out of the earth, and again the thing will not stand. In this version, they cannot make it get up off the ground because they cannot supply what it needs, and the spirit has to come from above to raise it. And the one who raises him is the woman. She comes to him while he is lying there and speaks to him, and the instruction is one word: arise. And when he sees her, Adam says this: "It is you who have given me life. You will be called the mother of the living." Go and look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. The line is in your Bible, sitting quietly at the end of the curse scene, where it has always looked like a naming and nothing more. This book takes the same title, moves it forward in the story, and makes it a job description. She is the one who got him off the floor. And then the snake arrives, and the text does something no other version of Genesis does. It says the female spiritual principle came into the snake, and it calls the snake the instructor, not the tempter, not the adversary, not the deceiver, the teacher. And the instructor teaches. Everything he says is checkable, which is the awkward part. He asks the woman what she was told, and she quotes the prohibition back at him. Then he corrects her, and here is the line in the standard English translation of the Coptic: "With death you shall not die. For it was out of jealousy that he said this to you. Rather your eyes shall open, and you shall become like gods, recognizing evil and good." Everything in that sentence is checkable against Genesis, and everything in it holds up. They eat. They do not die. Their eyes open. And what they see is not what you were taught they saw. What they see when their eyes open is the part this book adds, and it is savage. They look at the rulers who made them and see that those beings have no spirit in them at all, and the text says they were naked of the spiritual element. The horror in this version runs the other way round from the one you were taught. It is not the humans who are exposed. It is the management. Then the chief ruler comes into the garden and says the line from Genesis 3, verse 9. "Adam, where are you?" And the hypostasis of the archons pauses and tells you why he said it. He said it because he did not know what had happened. That is the entire argument of this literature, in one aside, hanging on a question that is sitting in your own Bible. The rulers curse the snake, and the text notes, dryly, that by then the spiritual principle had already left it. So what they cursed was an empty animal. The instructor was long gone, and they punished the snake. 2 books down, and both of them are still telling a story. 3 questions then, and the 3rd book answers exactly one of them. Did anyone ever say this out loud without the myth wrapped around it? Did anyone put the God of Genesis on trial in plain words? And if they did, what did they accuse him of? The 3rd book. What sort of God is this? The 3rd text drops the story completely and starts reading the prosecution case aloud. It is called the Testimony of Truth. It sits in Codex 9, and it is damaged. The beginning is missing, the end is missing, and there are holes through the middle of it. What survives includes a passage where the author simply reads Genesis chapter 3 out loud as evidence and takes it apart clause by clause. The reading goes roughly like this, and I am giving you the sense of the standard translation rather than a word-for-word quotation because of the gaps. First, this God refused to let the man eat from the tree of knowledge. Second, he came into the garden and said, "Adam, where are you?" And a God who has to ask does not have foreknowledge, so he did not know from the beginning. Third, he said, "Let us cast him out of this place, lest he eat of the tree of life and live forever," which means he was protecting something. And the conclusion the author reaches is stated flatly. He has shown himself to be a malicious envier. And then the question that gives this section its name. What sort of God is this? And then it stops addressing God and starts addressing you. Then the author turns on the audience, and this is the line that stings. Great is the blindness of those who read, and they did not know it. Not the blindness of those who never read it, the blindness of the ones who read it every week and did not notice. And somewhere in the same passage, the author gives the serpent the sentence that Genesis itself very nearly gives him. Genesis chapter 3 opens by calling the serpent more subtle than any beast of the field. And under the English, there is a Hebrew pun the translators could not carry across. The verse before the serpent enters says the man and his wife were arumim, naked. The next verse calls the serpent arum, subtle. In unpointed Hebrew, the two words are written with the same letters, side by side, on purpose. The testimony of truth reads that as a compliment and says he was wiser than all the animals in paradise. And before we leave the snake, there is one more thread, and it does not come from any buried book. It is in the canon, and it has been there the whole time. Numbers chapter 21. Israel is in the wilderness, serpents are killing people, and the remedy God gives Moses is a serpent. Make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten and looks at it will live. Moses makes it out of brass, puts it up, and it works. That object then stays in Israel for something like 700 years, and the second book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 4, tells you how it ended. Hezekiah broke in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made, because the people had been burning incense to it, and he gave it a dismissive name, Nehushtan, the brass thing. And then the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 14, picks the image back up and applies it to Christ. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. So inside the canon, a serpent on a pole is a source of healing, an object of worship that had to be smashed, and a figure for the crucifixion, depending on which book you are in. The readers we have been following tonight had all three of those passages in front of them, in the same scriptures as Genesis 3. When they decided the snake in the garden might have been the one telling the truth, they were not importing a foreign idea. They were pulling on a thread the Bible had already left hanging. 3 books, out of one jar, and there is your spread. The first one refuses to credit the serpent at all. The second makes him the instructor. The third makes him the smartest thing in the garden and puts God on trial. That disagreement is the most useful fact in this episode, because it tells you what kind of thing was actually buried at Nag Hammadi. Not a doctrine, an argument. Which leaves the question this episode has been circling. If the books lost, who took them off the shelf, and when? Before the last door tonight, the receipts, spoken aloud as always. The biblical text quoted throughout is the King James Version, public domain. Genesis chapters 1 to 5, Isaiah chapter 45, verses 5 to 7, Numbers chapter 21, verses 8 and 9, the second book of Kings chapter 18, verse 4, and the Gospel of John chapter 3, verse 14. The 3 Coptic texts are the secret book of John, also published under the name the Apocryphon of John, from Nag Hammadi Codices 2, 3, and 4, the Hypostasis of the Archons, Codex 2, Tractate 4, and the Testimony of Truth, Codex 9, Tractate 3. The standard modern English edition of all 3 is Marvin Meyer's The Nag Hammadi Scriptures, 2007, with the Waldstein and Wissa synopsis of 1995 behind the first one for anyone who wants the 4 copies, compared side by side. The hostile witness is Irenaeus of Lyons Against Heresies, Book 1, Chapter 29, written around the year 180, and it matters more than any other citation tonight, so hold on to it. The dating, honestly. Nobody knows who wrote any of these 3. The Coptic copies in the jar were made in the 4th century, but they are translations of Greek originals that are older, and the reason we can say that about the first one with confidence is Irenaeus. He was a bishop, he was writing against these people, and around 180, he summarized a version of the myth we just read, close enough that scholars can match it passage by passage. He was trying to bury it. Instead, he date-stamped it, and he is why we know that the lion-faced God and the boast and the correction were already circulating before he picked up his pen. He also won. It is worth being plain about that. Irenaeus and the tradition he spoke for carried the argument, and the books we read tonight lost so completely that no one in Europe could read a word of them until the 20th century. This episode is the losing side of a fight that ended 1800 years ago. One request, attached to one promise. The moment this channel passes 1,000 subscribers, YouTube unlocks links in the description, and from that day, every text, every translation, and every codex number named here gets linked under every episode. If you want this library one click away, instead of one search away, subscribing is how that gets built. And leave me a verdict in the comments. 3 books, 3 different jobs for the same snake. Tell me which reading you think the 4th century monks found hardest to keep on the shelf. The one that says their God could not make a body stand. The one that calls the serpent the instructor. Or the one that asks in writing what sort of God this is. This channel is building toward the full story of the whole Nag Hammadi library, all 13 codices and everything else that came out of that jar. These 3 books are in it. The Last Door. Easter, 367. By the spring of 367, the argument was effectively over, and the tidying up began. 1 bishop, 1 letter, 1 Easter, and a library goes into the ground. That Easter, Athanasius, the bishop of Alexandria, sent out his annual festal letter, the circular that told the Egyptian churches when to keep the feast. He used the 39th one for something else as well. He listed the books. 27 for the New Testament, the same 27 that are in it today, and this is the earliest surviving list that matches the modern one exactly. Then he named what should happen to everything outside the list. It was to be rejected, and he was blunt about the people producing it. That letter went out to the monasteries of Egypt, and one of the largest monastic federations in the world at that moment, the Pachomian Houses, had its headquarters at a place called Tbau, a few kilometers from the cliff at Jabal al-Tarif, where that jar came out of the ground. That is the leading explanation, and it is a good one. It is also not the only evidence, because a second copy of this material spent the 20th century failing to arrive. Monks with a library, an instruction from Alexandria about which books were now unacceptable, a decision not to destroy them, and a jar. And there is a physical reason to take it seriously, which is the best single piece of evidence in this whole story, and almost nobody mentions it. The covers of those 13 books are leather, and leather covers need stiffening. Whoever bound them stiffened the boards with waste papyrus, the way you would pack a parcel with old newspaper. When conservators took the bindings apart, that waste paper turned out to be documents, receipts, contracts, letters. Some of them carry dates, which is how the codices themselves are dated to the middle of the 4th century. And some of them are monastic correspondence. The books were bound with a monastery's rubbish, and the rubbish is what tells you when. It is still not settled, and this channel says so, when it is not. The dates fit, and the geography fits. Against that, some scholars have pointed out that nobody has proved the jar came from the monastery at all, and have argued for other explanations, including that books like these were sometimes buried with their owners. The honest version is that we have a very good suspect, a strong motive, an exact year, and no confession. And there is a second copy of this evidence, which spent the 20th century failing to arrive. In 1896, a scholar bought a small Coptic Codex in Cairo. It was catalogued in Berlin as Papyrus Berlinensis 8502, and inside it, along with a text called the Gospel of Mary, was a complete copy of the secret book of John, 49 years before anybody opened that jar. It was prepared for publication, and the publication did not happen. A water main burst at the printing house in Leipzig in 1912 and destroyed the printed sheets. Then there was a war. Then the scholar who had spent his life on it died. Then there was another war. The edition finally came out, under Walter Till's name, in 1955, by which time Egypt had produced 3 more copies of the same book out of the ground. That is a full human lifetime in which the answer was sitting in a museum drawer in Berlin, catalogued, purchased, and unread. So here is the question the 3 books leave on the table, and it is not the one about whether any of it is true. Every claim the serpent made in Genesis chapter 3 is confirmed inside Genesis chapter 3 by the other party. That was true before 1945, and it will be true in whatever Bible is nearest to you right now. What those 3 Coptic books did was notice it in writing and follow it to the end of the sentence. They read slowly. The question they leave is why the noticing had to go in a jar. Genesis 3, verse 22, still says, "The man is become as one of us, to know good and evil." Genesis 3, verse 24, still posts a flaming sword in front of the other tree. Isaiah 45 still has both sentences in the same speech. "There is no God beside me, and I create evil." The 13 codices are still in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, and the secret book of John is still in 3 of them. Papyrus Berlinensis, 8502, is still in Berlin, bought in 1896 and printed in 1955. Athanasius's 39th festal letter still survives, still dated to Easter 367, and still names the books it will allow. And the serpent is still, in the oldest text either side of this argument, the one who told her what would actually happen.